Introducing the new 70-200 G Master 2 lens. It's the world's first large aperture telephoto zoom lens to incorporate two sets of dual autofocus groups with linear actuators for high-speed autofocus that rivals even prime lenses with the same focusing engines. It's also the world's lightest weight 70-200 with internal focus and zoom. Let's break it down to the good news. First of all, Sony is saying, and I believe them after using it for 19 days, that this lens is 4 times faster autofocus than the original 70-200 G Master, which is really fast. It has 4 different extreme dynamic AF linear motors, internal focus and zoom, and it contributes to different balance, more like the 400-2.8 and the 600 G Master, meaning that the weight is not in the front like old school telephoto lenses. The weight's perfectly balanced in the middle where the tripod collar is. It's better, stronger, faster, but the new lens is like Steve Austin in those regards, but it won't cost you $6 million. It's not just fast, but it's also more accurate, especially on the Alpha 1. It's faster on all bodies, but in particular, you're going to see a huge difference with Alpha 1, A9 II, and the A9, which are the best autofocusing cameras Sony's ever made. It's most accurate to see this lens as a mini 400-2.8 or a mini 600 G Master. All the design magic that went into those big 2 lenses are here present in the 70-200 G Master 2. With the new linear autofocus motors, the new GM2 allows you to seamlessly actively autofocus while zooming and tracking the action. This is something the big 2 GMs can't do because they don't zoom, they're just primes. This is big. More on that later. This lens is 29% lighter than the original G Master. The original G Master lens is 1,480 grams or 2.95 pounds. This one is just 1,045 grams or 2.3 pounds. And to give you an idea, that's 435 grams less than the original lens. It weighs just 205 grams more than the F4 version G lens, that's 70-200 G, which weighs in at 1.85 pounds. I noticed a big difference at a wedding that I shot last Saturday. It balances perfectly, and you just don't feel all that weight and pain from your shoulder and your back. Let's talk about the internal lens makeup. What's the guts of this thing? The G Master 2 has 14 groups of 17 elements versus the older lens having 18 groups of 23 elements. So there's less glass in here, which contributes to less weight. It has 1 aspheric lens element, 2 super ED elements, 1 ED aspherical element, 2 ED elements, and 1 extreme aspherical element. Now, all these elements working together significantly reduce chromatic aberration versus the GM1 lens. What's interesting about this lens, if you look at the breakout on Sony's website of this lens and all the groups and the elements, you'll see that there are a static group of lenses in the front, a static group of lenses in the rear, and then there's 2 separate groups that are connected to each of 2 motors that move in the middle. So really the only active working is in the center of the lens. Close focus is pretty remarkable. At 70 millimeters, this thing will focus to 0.4 meters or 1.3 feet. Or at 200 millimeters, it's 0.82 meters or 2.7 feet. Because of the design of the elements and the groups, flat focus is possible at minimum focus. So the new G Master 2 lens acts a little more like a macro lens than a zoom lens when you get close to things, meaning it's got a flat field. You can really push in and get close to things in a way not possible before. Take a look at these images that I shot with a 2x teleconverter at or near minimum focus. Even when this close, the lens stays sharp edge to edge. I spent about an hour and a half at the local zoo here in Knoxville, first looking at plants and then a few animals. It was really cool, but I was just blown away, even with the 2x teleconverter connected, how close I could get to things. It was remarkable. It's obvious that when they designed this lens that the engineers also had on the workbench with them the 1.4 and the 2x teleconverters. And I think that these teleconverters were in mind in a way just like they were when they built the 400 GM and the 600 GM. I honestly haven't used my 2X very much since I got the 600 F4. I used to use it all the time on the 400-2.8 to make it at 800-5.6. But once the 6 came in, I could use the 1.4 and get the same thing with a better optic. But my guess is that the engineers at Sony really utilize the teleconverters in all their development of this GM2 lens, and it really shows. Let's talk about the control rings configuration. That's the aperture, the zoom, and the focus. Even though they added the aperture ring and a ton of additional controls in the control panel here, the zoom and focus rings have really not changed that much. They're really, really close to what they were before. They're slightly ahead of where they were before because of the aperture ring, but because of the weight is more in the middle, I think they'll balance better in your hand over a long period of time. Now, this is a big deal for basketball shooters, people who just constantly shoot, picking up the lens all the time and putting it with your eye and then putting it down and switching for down court. But also, one of the key factors in this concept of the control ring configuration is that your muscle memory is going to stay the same. If you get this new G Master lens, it's going to be so similar to the lens that you're already used to, you're not going to have to relearn anything. It's already there. For wedding events, sports, and portrait shooters that spend a ton of time shooting the 70-200 focal length, you're going to find it fantastic because you just don't have to, they didn't move anything around. They just left it alone, which I very much appreciate. The zoom ring is reworked. The zoom ring torque is easier to turn. Many of us remember the old Nikkor lenses, the IF primes, like the 304.5 ED lens. You could do two-finger zoom and it was buttery smooth and super loose. This is about the same. You can easily two-finger zoom this, even especially if you have large hands. There's more evidence here that Sony is listening. This is something that a lot of us complained about, especially on the 100-400 zoom. And with a G Master 2 lens, you're going to really like this. There's a new lens shade. There's no more pedal design, and this is really welcome to a lot of us that shoot basketball, because when you're shooting hoops and you're sitting on the court in your Crazy Creek chair, you're constantly picking the lens up, and sometimes you're doing it really fast, and you're trying to transfer from down court to your close side lens. This would be the close side lens. And with the pedal design, the lens would have a tendency to fall over. And with this flat design and with this rubber edge, it reduces the bounce or impact when we hurry, because sometimes there's a fast break and you've just got to change quick. This is going to be a much better lens for basketball and other sports. It still allows for the circular polarizers and variable neutral density filters to be used with the lens hood attached, no matter how big or thick they are. It's still got the door on it in the bottom, as you can see in the picture. It also locks on really well. This lens shade is much better attached than the other one that's on the G Master, on the original 70-200 G Master. So after 20 days of shooting, it never moved once. So I was very happy about that. And I dragged it around at that wedding for about 12 hours and it never moved. So I'm really happy to report that. When you remove the lens shade, you see yet another improvement if you look closely on the front element flange. This is where you attach the new lens shade. There you're going to find a much larger and more heavy-duty lens shade bayonet attachment. Let's be honest, many sports shooters beat on their gear, and sometimes bad things happen to the front of the lens. Here Sony really beefed up this hood attachment area and made improvements on how the lens hood attaches. The entire area in the front of the lens has been reworked to show, once again, Sony actually listens and they take note of what kind of repairs are coming in to Sony Pro Service. Control panel changes. There are now 6 different switches instead of just 3 on the side of the lens. These control focus mode, full-time DMF, range limiter, steady shot switch, steady shot mode, and iris lock. There are a lot of advantages of this lens for video. The aperture change is not just for stills but for video. Now it's declickable, so you have manual aperture control ring that's declickable. The new iris lock, this is basically Sony showing its DNA in motion picture camera design. Iris is something that it's another word for aperture, but in still photography you don't use the term iris, we use the term aperture. And the fact that Sony printed iris on the side of this lens is proof of their DNA in making movies. This new aperture drive unit inside the lens, that is to say the part that actuates in and out and down and making the lens opening smaller or larger, is now quieter, smaller, and lighter. It's much more suitable for video, where autofocus is going to be used in interviews without focus puller. And this is more and more common as people learn to trust the IAF that's in the Alpha 1, the A7S3, the FX3, FX6, and FX9. There's also less breathing in this lens. So when you're doing a two-shot, you're going to have less problem with breathing when you go from one person to the other if you quick focus. The new aperture motor is quiet with absolutely no vibration. So just like the 400GM and the 600GM, when you're using this lens, you don't really feel anything. Sometimes you wonder if it's working, and then you realize it is when you see the pictures. The IF is as good as the 35 and the 50GM and the 135GM. It's flawless. It also balances better on rails with the weight distribution centered here instead of out front. So the tripod collar is telling you where the center of the weight of the lens is. So it's going to be much better for rigging up on an FX9, for instance, with rails and things like that. Once you get used to the autofocus speed and sensitivity menus on the video side of things, you can achieve easily really smooth organic focus changes using the touchscreen LCD to focus. It works like a charm. There's potential advantage to what can be achieved in terms of production value when combining the declicked aperture ring on the new 70-200-2.8 lens with Sony's FX6 and FX9 cameras, which both feature in-camera variable neutral density. For creative operators and thoughtful directors, the possibilities are pretty obvious in terms of allowing varying depth of field to become part of the story being told, along with dialogue, music, lighting, pacing, editing, and camera movement. Having the freedom to change the depth of field and focal length in one clip without affecting exposure is pretty sweet. Just think about that for a minute. Welcome are its noticeably lighter weight, sharper glass, 4 times faster autofocus than the GM1, and the added video capabilities. I've been really impressed over the last 20 days of shooting on this new lens, and I hate to send it back to Sony. Maybe it'll get lost in shipping. Nah. I'm glad there's a versatile long zoom that matches up with and can harness the speed possible with the Alpha 1. In my testing, the phase detect Sony video cameras like the FX3, FX6, and FX9 simply rip on moving subjects. I keep saying it, but Sony is listening. This latest G Master lens is a direct result of Sony paying attention to what we really need to work our assignments better and to make great images. At just $27.99 US, it's only $200 more than the original GM lens. And that is a home run in my book. Thanks so much for watching. Please see my other video with real images from my 19 days with the new 70-200-2.8 GM2 lens. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to. I'm Pat Murphy-Racey, Sony Artisan Imagery.